I think I read somewhere where you said something about how public art should be part of the infrastructure, not an afterthought. You've done like some very big pieces that a lot of people drive by and they're like, oh, this feels different. On this episode of the Orlando Reel podcast, I interviewed international artist Jefrë. He's an Orlando resident, but he has built things all over the world. Iconic things like the Victor in Manila, all the way to the Disco Dog in Lake Nona. We talked about public art and why cities need to have these iconic pieces for wayfinding and placemaking. I hope you enjoy it. Jefrë, you've created art all over the world, and yet you call Orlando home. Why is that?
Well, hey, Ken, thanks for having me here today.
Of course, man.
I've seen you at numerous events and excited to be here today. I love what you do in terms of growing Orlando, right? And I think that's sort of the question, like, what made this my home, right?
Yeah,
and so that's always the question to a lot of people because we're never from here. We're all transient, right? And so, you know, my history started actually from Chicago. So being from Chicago, I was doing urban planning and design, working for a big architecture firm in design, working on things like Millennium Park. And then, you know, I was asked to trade in my bow tie. I was a bow tie suit guy back then, which was crazy. Long hair. I was like back in the Miami Vice days. You know, It's kind of crazy. And asked to trade in my bow tie for some flip-flops and moved to Fort Lauderdale. This firm recruited me there to then work on, projects like Atlantis, work on the Bahamas and stuff like that. So, and then a firm up here in Orlando, started doing obviously why a lot of people know what Orlando is about are the theme parks. So I started coming up here and work on theme park work until, 15 years ago when I started my own practice purely on the idea of public art.
Was that, so as you're coming up in Chicago and like looking at, there's some pretty iconic art there, public art kind of there, and like different spaces and that kind of thing. Does that feel like shaped who you became?
Yeah, I think so. I think when you are raised in big cities, you kind of are used to things of larger scale. But I think working at a firm there where they were doing, I was in my 20s and working in a firm that you were working on sort of the greatest projects in the world, and getting exposure to just these sort of landmark and monument things that people are doing in Dubai or Asia or Europe. And at that age, you're sort of like, I want to do those kind of things one day, And so that maybe shaped my mind into not necessarily doing buildings, but maybe shifting to sort of my desires of being an artist,
Sure.
So.
Wild. So 15 years, though. You could have gone anywhere after that. You go to Fort Lauderdale, back to Orlando. You could have LA, New York, literally anywhere you wanted to, but you still call Orlando home. Why did you choose to do that?
Well, it's interesting. I always give a shout out to Donna Dallas. She's the love ambassador of Orlando. But she is an artist, a fellow artist, and I think she made a comment to me one time that said, when people come to Orlando and they get to a certain stage in their life, they feel like they always have to go to New York or LA or somewhere of a big city to kind of continue on their career. And I think for me, I in some ways, Orlando, became a place where it was sort of very still an empty canvas from the art scene. And it was a way for me to help communities here understand what public art does for cities with my experience everywhere else. So I sort of made a decision to say, hey, why do I have to go to New York or LA or Paris, although they're great cities?
Sure, yeah.
I'd rather go visit them and do work in these other cities, but still make Orlando my home. And so, yeah, I'm here. This is where I do laundry.
You travel a ton, though, right? We were just talking about this before we started.
Yes.
You're everywhere doing new projects around the world. That's so
just,
cool.
Going where, cities and developers love the idea of the importance of public art and actually how it transforms cities. So for me, I'm really interested in changing skylines. And so that's what, makes me travel a lot, is trying to help kind of leave a landmark in the world through my, public art. So,
man, I'm excited to dive into that and kind of like what that does to shape cities. But before we get into that, what was your breakthrough moment? I mean, you've been an artist for 15 years. Was there a time where you're like, nope, I'm going all in, and then this was kind of the thing that put you on the map?
I think I went all in when I started. I mean, my whole all in story is literally, I was working for a practice or a firm in the design field, and I had that incident where I had a heart attack and triple bypass surgery at the age of 35
Whoa, my
at the
goodness.
Delano Hotel in Miami. I didn't know what it was. I thought I was having indigestion, and they said, "Hey, it's interesting. You go to a Miami hospital and ER, they see your STL level high, and they're like, "Are you on heroin, coke?" Like, I know,
Right.
like,
Which
what's
cocktail
going
you
on?
on?
Yeah. And I'm like, what? It's like, is that a common question for people in the ER? It goes, "At your age, yes."
Yeah.
Like, I'm on nothing, and they're like, "Well, you're having a heart attack right now." So, had a heart attack, put a couple stents in, had triple bypass surgery.
At
Recovered,
35.
and then walked into the office when I was recovered and said, "I'm going to quit," and said, "Cash out my 401k and do art." And I was like, "I don't know how to do it, but I'm just going to do competitions." And so back then there's this thing called percent for art. So cities are actually allocating 1% of building projects towards investments into public art, and then they would do design competitions. So it didn't really matter who what institution, what museums you show. It's really about the idea. And so for me, this blind competitions allowed me to become a finalist on 12 in all over the U.S. and won 8 in my first year.
Jeez.
And I was the fastest public artist to win that many in my first year.
So you're like, I might be onto something here.
Yeah, and I think that was my first year. And I was like, okay, what now? And so I was like, I'm going all in. I said, hey, I think the thing where I do have heart disease, right? And so I'm like, I've wanted to kind of leverage this idea of city building skylines that I had experience in and do it through art. And so I was like, when's the last time anyone created an Eiffel Tower or Statue of Liberty or St. Louis Arch? And they've always been gifts to cities or
Sure.
world fairs. And I wanted to be the next guy to do the next series of icons because I wanted. Could you imagine meeting the guy that did the Eiffel Tower just walking around?
Right,
We
yeah.
don't have those opportunities
No.
right now. And so it's interesting. So I started doing that. I started doing things that are like, wow, 10 feet and then 20 feet. Next, it's like 10 stories and then 20 and now 28 stories, right? So it's interesting because everyone's like, I want one of those, but can I get taller? I want one of those, but I want to get taller. And
So they're pushing you to get better and bigger and all of that.
yeah, and I think what happens is that, public art becomes, for me, the way I sell it, or these iconic monumental pieces of art have become things where it's been able to raise property values. So someone in your field, it's really public art is another level of how housing or the market raises because of these art pieces. And that's why these developers come to me. Like if you build it, they will come, not only the people, but the buyers,
100%. I feel like, I think I read somewhere where you said something about how public art should be part of the infrastructure, not an afterthought. And I think that the areas where, like a Lake Nona, where many people like watching, you guys probably seen like the Disco Dog or the Beacon and some of the other ones, right? They're iconic and people go and they take pictures and it becomes part of the community. But then you've done the binary garage. You've done like some very big pieces that a lot of people drive by and they're like, oh, this feels different.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, everyone and people in the real estate world want to live on a central park, or on the ocean, And so if you don't have that kind of land mass or value, then people want to live next to things that have history and iconic kind of, opportunities. So, these things where, where I'm creating kind of a center, not necessarily a park, but maybe it's a park or plaza, but then has an iconic moment like the garage. The garage was in the center of Lake Nona. And when they told me to come here and put a piece of art of it, I'm like, there's nothing I can do to hide this ugly garage. The garage is right in the middle of the town center.
Right, yeah.
Let me make the garage the art piece. And now it is the art piece and the icon that if you can imagine when you see things on like when Lake Nona gets featured, on national press or you're pitching or even on Lake Nona's, deck board when they send out things to pitch other developers, the garage is on their cover. Like it's a garage at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, you turn something ugly and made it
because
incredible.
it's something that, has these magical digital projections and these artworks that people would only associate behind a gate that you'd have to buy a ticket. And so it's something that I brought into public. And that's what public art is. It's really about sharing this idea of culture and art to the public without having to buy admission to a ticket. And that then drives, this is back to the real estate thing, not only housing, but then commercial value. So a lot of the artwork that I do, like the big heart piece in South Florida, 10-story heart, the commercial real estate originally was sort of fast casual, and now it's fine dining.
No way.
Because now everyone wants views of the heart, know? And so the not only residential but commercial values also change and influence based on some of the artworks that I have created around the world.
This episode is brought to you by my real estate team, the Pozek Group. Check us out over on Google. We've got over 1,600 5-star reviews. When it's time to buy, sell, invest, we want to be your real estate resource of choice. Reach out at theorlandoreal.com/real. Is that easy to get developers and maybe city officials to buy into? I mean, is like, hey, it worked here, it'll work there, or is there still some pushback?
It's always pushback, but when you show them data, numbers don't lie, right?
Yeah.
I think, it's interesting, when I did the giant 28-story sculpture in my homeland, Manila, we drew it first and then pitched it, and then was able to pitch it in a way that then we were able to sell off land to Hong Kong land to then drive a larger high-end development next to the Victor, which is a sculpture.
Victor, yeah.
And also the hotel, which was probably nothing against a Marriott or some smaller brand, but became a Shangri-La because of the fact a 5-star, because they wanted to be next to the icon, like the icon of the country, right? So,
of course.
So these deals were made because of what we were going to create. It's more than just a park with a bunch of pop-up jets and a grand fountain.
Sure.
People are now looking for things that they can take a selfie in front of because we're such in a selfie culture, right?
Sure.
So you can only take a selfie in front of pop-up jets so many times and not know where you are. But
Sure.
you take a selfie in front of the Eiffel Tower. When I say Eiffel Tower, Arc de Triomphe, Statue of Liberty, Jesus the Redeemer, the Bean, I don't have to tell you where you are, right?
Right where they're at, yeah.
So when I go to your city, when I go to Orlando, like, what is yours? And they're like,
Aha.
What
We want
is
one of
ours?
those. Yeah.
right?
So, so take me back to, so you said you went from 10 foot to start at 20 foot to now the Victor is like taller than the Statue of Liberty,
Yeah.
right? And so walk me through that. How do you even unpack like how to source all of that? And you're in a different country and you're creating that. And like, yes, you're the artist, but are you also the general manager going through all of that kind of stuff in the back office as well?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I always say I'm like kind of a design build contractor. It's almost like building a building. So it's like building a 9-story building or a 20-story building or this new project I'm working on. I'm not sure if it's still real. We're still in concept, but it's going to be like almost 100 stories tall. It's like 5 times taller than the Jesus Redeemer right now. Like it'll be the largest Jesus Christ sculpture in the world.
No way.
Yeah.
That's wild.
I mean, it's really interesting when you can kind of say, hey, that floor plate fits, 5 stories of retail in the thigh of Jesus Christ. It's just, I don't know if I'm sacrilegious by saying things like that, but they're thinking like it's just
what's the price per square foot of Jesus' right thigh?
Exactly. I know. I mean, everybody would want to be in there.
Of course, yeah.
But it's just crazy when, I had to offer, someone from, he was the king of Sudan, come to me and say, hey, I want to build a large monument to South Africa.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not from South Africa, but they understand that I not only know how to design it and conceptualize it, but I know how to actually build it.
Yeah.
And so, sourcing and things that you had mentioned, like it's really understanding the trades of what the end result is. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of engineering in it. It's like building a building. So it does start with concept sketches and modeling, but then, what developers love is like, wow, you have to figure out, category, 2 or 3 or 4 hurricane and earthquake. And it's like building a building. So we have to abide by building standards. The old days of artists coming in and say, don't worry, we'll make it really strong. It doesn't work in today's world of Morgan and Morgan, right? so
is that, so you go, do you sit in front of the city council and you're like, hey, we want to build this 10-story heart here. And they're like, how do we even approve this, or yes or no? Yeah,
they don't even know how to permit it.
Right.
Like, there's no category for it, right? Is it a building? Is it a sign? Is it like,
it's kind of cool.
Yeah, so it's kind of cool. So we kind of blur the lines there. I mean, it's interesting because, with there's architectural design guidelines everywhere. And, I get this, I get sort of good and bad from reception from architects sometimes because wow, like when I propose something like that, it gets shut down. But because you have this word artist in front of you, you could do like whatever you want.
Done, yeah.
So it's like as an architect, you're too crazy. As an artist, you're not crazy enough, right? So I think it's a great, title to have, and I think for me, it just allows me to have freedom to create, right? And I think why people love that I can keep scaling is because I've been able to execute things at a smaller level and a bigger and bigger and bigger to a point where, maybe I'll have a building that looks like a sculpture, right? Maybe
So
I should
good.
design a condo
Right.
building
looks like
that
a-
looks like a sculpture. So that was actually my dream, is to make a figure that actually becomes like in the skyline of the sea. You'll see all these, these rectangular squares, and all of a sudden you
this is like-
see this sexy silhouette, and be like, "That's a building.
It's a person, and I live on the 30th floor. Yeah.
Yes,
That's so good.
live in the ass."
Yeah, that's a discount there.
Yeah,
Actually,
exactly.
yeah. So you get to see so many different cities. If you could base it in the United States, what cities do you feel like are doing really good with public art?
Well, obviously the big cities. I think, LA, New York, Chicago, they've have a history there for a long, long time of integrating not public art, but actually very people in the street art industry.
Yeah.
That's helped commercialize it and bring it more in the mainstream to even, world-renowned artists that have these giant sculptures. Not necessarily giant, not as big as mine, but
Bigger than- yeah.
10 feet, that are become iconic to the city. Even like something as small as the love sculpture,
Yeah.
in New York or even in Philadelphia,
Sure.
that Robert Indiana did is become the symbol to Philadelphia, right? And it's only like 8 feet tall, right? So it depends on like how you embrace public art. You can make it a post stamp or a postcard, or you can make it part of the skyline of the city, right? And
Sure.
so, I think, Orlando has opportunities to the city itself. Like with Lake Eola, I think
Sure.
there's opportunities there. I
Are
think
you helping with any of that?
they have a great art program out there. I think for me, like, I do think, this is me personally, is there anything that's going to make me on my 5th day or first day vacation from coming from out of town and spending on Disney property or Universal property or any of those properties
Yeah.
to drive downtown and go see? Yes or no? Right?
Right now, no.
Yeah. And so that's always like, nothing against the fountain, right?
Yeah. It's
But
okay.
if I mentioned to someone Lake Eola Fountain in Asia or Paris, she'd be like I'm not
I
saying
came to see the castle.
I came to see the castle.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
how do we create that castle that's not outside of the gate, but then in downtown, so that people can go there to not only take a selfie, but then also have lunch or buy some merch or support local businesses?
Sure.
That's what also public art should do. It's really create economic development for the cities.
I agree. So in that, I feel like we talked about public art, but getting the city's body into this idea, is it so much more expensive to do something like this? Or should they be thinking about it in a different way because they can charge more price per square foot, or they can get more visitors to come through there? Like if you're talking to a developer or somebody that works for a city council, like how are you selling them on that?
I sell them on 1%. 1% of the item that will be the most selfie thing in front of your project. How expensive? How much do you spend in marketing? Right?
Yeah.
so
Huge part of your budget.
So that's the other sort of avenue I've been working on, is this idea of leveraging advertising. So
Sure.
I've been able to find a market where I'm working with brands. So it costs like $200,000 to rent the billboard a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
How much data do they get back on how many people actually look at the billboard?
Almost impossible.
How many people take selfies in front of the billboard?
Sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right? But I can take that $200,000, and if you want to buy the naming rights to one of my sculptures, you'll get all the data you want.
Because now you can look it up on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube,
Yeah,
everywhere else. How many times
I'm
was
not
it mentioned?
doing anything that the Bean has done.
Sure.
So the Bean cost $25 million. A lot of money, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It got its ROI back in 5 years. AT&T came in, spent $3 million to put their name on the plaza.
No way.
Yeah. Because it was getting 8-point-something million visitors every year.
Well, that's why if you have like the Kia Center or the whatever, like it's always, these naming rights have always been a thing, but
Yeah.
not with public art. And so
No.
you're pairing those two together.
I'm pairing those two together.
That's brilliant.
And that's how I've been able to help not only fund cities, but also fund private developers. So private developers, I'm speaking to many of them, and I said, look, if you're trying to figure out how to lease out or sell off potential tenants, not even tenants for people who live there, but the commercial real estate on the front, you have to create something that's iconic that people remember, right?
Absolutely.
Like these sculptures that that I have in Asia, where there's just a giant figure sitting at the corner of the building, and the building looks like it's a beautiful building, but it looks like a lot of the other buildings everywhere.
Yeah.
But when you drive down that street and you're like, where is the Pozek Group's office? Like, it's by that giant 8-story man.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to
know, yeah,
you know where it is. You
Yeah.
don't have to tell people. So my work also becomes wayfinding opportunities for these developers, and that's marketing you cannot, put a price on.
Makes total sense, man. So how do you go? You make these massive figures. How do you go about conceptualizing some of that? Like, how do you know where it's like the disco dog it should be a dog and it should look like this, or it should be, the victor should have this? Do you start with the story and work backwards, or how do you unpack that?
It's always about research, right? So, I'm not necessarily a studio artist unless they ask me for something that's based on my studio work. My studio's work is based on those low poly fractal figures, based on this idea of points of connection. But more or less, I do research about cities of where these pieces are going to be. And it's really, when I say, as a public artist, it's really art about you and not about me. I'm not here to impose my work onto you unless you want to have a piece that's part of my collection.
Yep.
But really, public art for me is really about creating something that identifies the city, sort of respects the culture of the people that inhabit it, and then celebrates, this idea or mission that you're trying to evolve or create from what your project's trying to do.
Makes sense. What do you feel like maybe developers or public officials are doing wrong right now as regards to like placemaking?
Well, I'll go back a second. So I'll give you an example for a thing. So the Victor, for example, the Victor was based on this idea of a lot of us looking for the American dream. My parents looked for the American dream. A lot of immigrants move everywhere. And it was a reminder that once you go find this dream, American dream, European dream, wherever you go evolve to, don't forget where you're from. And that this beacon, this sort of hand in the air, becomes a beacon of hope for you to come back, to take what you've learned over there and bring it back to your homeland.
Makes total sense. I love that, man. So give me something like maybe advice for young artists if they decided they want to follow in your footsteps or just like even express themselves one way or the other. Do you give any advice out for people like that?
So it's really hard for me, to be honest. Like, I don't know what advice to give other people. Every time I give a talk or I'm somewhere, I have parents come up to me and say, or people say, my child wants to be an artist, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I was supposed to be a doctor, right? But for me, it's like in anything in life, I think if you follow your passion, then all that other stuff will come. Like if you're chasing the fame or the money, then it's not going to come. Like if you just do good stuff and do good work, all that stuff comes with it, right?
Sure.
And so my advice is always that just do things that you're passionate about. Specifically to an artist, there's a couple things. One is, I get this thing where, artists tend to be very aloof and not really all there per se, right? I guess that's the mystique of an art.
Yeah,
the perception, right? But I think you have to have some structure. Like you have to understand, three things: schedule, budget, and execution. Because I think what happens is that you only get one shot, right? Especially when it's your first time. Sometimes artists are just like, sure, we have some extra money, let's give them a shot, right? And so sometimes it's things that you can hang on a wall. But if it's things that's integrated with buildings, that are interacting with buildings, then you have to know your stuff. So I think the other thing is know what you know what you don't know. And for me, it's like I've always at the ending slide is this Avenger slide. Like I always show that I just put the who's who together. Like I can either be the Hulk or I can be, Captain America. Like,
Sure.
I fit the role that I need to fit within each of the projects, but I make sure I assemble a team that can execute it in its own way. And the third thing is just, it's sort of marketing and be able to share and sell your work. Like, I think that's the hardest thing is that, not to say that, the best salesman is the best artist, but I think the artists that get out there are the people who actually know how to share their work. You know? Either through through social media or doing art shows or being on podcasts.
Yeah, well, it's storytelling, right? I think like if people aren't gonna, it's a perception of, is that valuable, and it's value because of the story many times of like who that person was and how it's like almost every business where most of us didn't get in business to go like lead generate. We wanted to do the thing. You wanted to be an artist. You didn't realize you had to go actually sell it as well, right? Yeah, and I think it's interesting to kind of unpack
it's
that.
the same thing in life. I mean, the reality is that it's about making someone feel comfortable that they want you to work with together.
Yeah.
Right. It's sort of, they could care less if you're the best sales agent in all of U.S. But if you're an asshole,
right? Exactly. They don't
want to work with you.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think, and then at the end of the day, like if you're not doing good work anyways, this hat and glass, all this stuff is just, bullshit. Right?
Sure.
But, I think being able to know, not only be able to storytell, but know how to execute and share, your story. Right.
Yeah.
I think people buy passion all the time. Right.
Totally.
So.
Yeah, they buy from emotion more than almost anything else, which is kind of a wild thing. What's one piece of public arts or just art in general that you wish you would have created, but you didn't?
Oh, it's interesting because, when I was an intern doing we call them as-built. We're documenting existing conditions in the field.
Yeah.
But for Millennium Park, I wish I was actually the guy that did the first piece there.
Yeah. Why is that?
Well, I think Millennium Park in some ways or the bean itself, put public art back on the map.
Sure.
I mean, there are Picassos and Henry Moores and amazing historical art in the city of Chicago, but no one never knew that until this shiny bean called Cloudgate by Anish Kapoor just showed up, right? So I don't know if I necessarily wish I did the bean, but I wish I was the guy that helped create this evolution of the importance of public art to cities.
Sure.
But now I'm doing, I am the guy, at least I could say, that's trying to create the next monuments of the world.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't really know anyone else that's doing that, to be honest.
Yeah.
I keep trying to, I don't think so. Right. I think the 28 stories thing is probably the tallest thing in the world. The heart thing isn't, like, I think, not that the tallest is always the better, but I think doing skyline level things that are actually becoming the postcards to your cities.
Yeah.
Which is a
St.
good
Louis
definition.
Archway, like all that kind of stuff. You're there because, and nobody's been doing that for a very long time. So that's very cool to take that iteration and take it to the next level, which is what you've done.
Yeah. I think that's probably like one of the goals for me is like to be the postcards, create these memorable postcards through my work. Right?
That's aspirational and like very impressive. So thank you. So what's next? What are you working on next?
There's a lot of things like, I think I guess it's not public, but I guess it's public. I don't know. Maybe I've been sharing it a little bit, but I'm working on, I've been trying to work on the world's largest underwater sculpture.
Where?
So it's over in Necker Island.
Okay.
So Necker Island's owned by, my Mr. Branson.
Yeah.
And been working with him, spoke with him, he's like, let's create something.
Something crazy, yeah. That you have to dive to see. Are those conditions, they have to be way different. You got seawater you're dealing with, you're building something underwater. That's crazy.
No, and I actually love this challenge just from the fact that, I really love environmental art, things that are functional. And I think this is an opportunity to kind of create an artificial reef and also a skyline piece, but underwater, right? It's part of the skyline of the ocean, right? I never thought about it that way, right?
There's going to be,
I don't know that exists, right?
I'm thinking of the selfies that are going to be taken.
Yeah,
that's wild.
But it would be, a place of destination for people to scuba dive and visit in public. I think that one, as well as sort of the world's largest Jesus Christ, is another piece that I'm working on for a president of a country. And then, I think, it's really trying to figure out the line between a fine artist and a commercial artist. And I have that struggle sometimes because, my ambition is still to figure out how to, my first show was not in a art fair or in a hotel lobby or it was actually in a museum, right? I kind of did the unnormal thing where you went through this kind of progression. Like it's kind of like the NBA, skip high school ball, college ball, and just rent
No
to the
G
NBA.
League for you.
Yeah.
You were just like,
Yeah, and then where you go for there, right? So so I want to figure out like how I can bring my artwork to people who are not necessarily also buying a ticket to go to an institution, but then is able to go into people's homes, you know? So I have to figure out what that level is. And so I've been looking at opportunities in Asia right now where I'm doing a perfume line, like a fragrance line,
No
where my
way.
sculpture, everyone.
where the bottle is
Yeah, the
something
bottle is the
incredible?
sculpture,
Well,
right.
you did something with the Orlando Magic, right? You did a collab over
Yes.
there. That was really cool. So are you working on any other collabs like that?
Yeah, so I did this great collab with Orlando Magic, with Stuff, and some basketball players
Very
with
cool.
my sculptural box heads, which is my kind of studio work.
Yeah.
The box head, just so everyone knows, is everyone asks why is a box on the head. It's so for me, public art has always been about not necessarily buildings, but the people who occupy these buildings, and the boxes are representative of buildings themselves. So each of the forms are in positions of motion. So when you see it, it's called time, love, joy, passion, and when you put all these figural forms on a horizon line, it makes a skyline of buildings.
No way.
Of emotions. And so I just keep adding on to that collection as I keep moving. And so that's sort of how that box series has evolved. And now everyone loves the box because the box is so simple that it actually can be a cap for like a cap for like a fragrance line.
Sure,
or
yeah.
it could be a light.
Oh, that's such a good idea.
Or it could be a Rubik's Cube. Like
Yeah.
there's these things that I'm working on with some folks, you know, in the celebrity world to help me figure out how to do more brand collaboration. So
Such a good idea, man. I love this. I got this idea around when you think about arts and artistry and public art, and I feel like some people think it's a little woo-woo, but although there's many people that'll they love taking a selfie because it looks cool. Is that kind of, when I think about artists and art and what you do, I feel like that's a really good way as like a gateway into artistry for people, right? Like for more appreciation of the art scene.
yeah, I think in some ways when you're a painter and you're doing photography, a lot of those venues are areas where you have to force people to actually be there to actually see the work. Whereas public art is public. You're driving by it all the time, right? And so the work I have on I-4 with Advent Health, which is on Princeton and I-4 with the sculptural note forms that are LED lit at night to change every month based on how Advent wants to share what they're trying to share each month, whether it's Breast Cancer Awareness Week or
Autism awareness or something like that. Yeah.
And they change the color based on that. But those notes are actually origami notes as symbolism, as thank you notes to the healthcare workers.
Oh, man.
And so when people enter the city, that Princeton exit is almost kind of like a gateway to the enter the city.
Oh, yeah.
People are greeted with these thank you notes, you know. And I have a video of me going to the hospitals and giving out notes to all the healthcare workers who, you know, honestly helped me to get through my issues with heart disease.
Sure.
And so it's kind of a way for me to give back. And I think that's an interesting way to share your work, as you were asking, like how does people get to see their work more through the public art worlds, because you get to drive by it, right? And so the other one is along Kirkman Road. You see that's where my first studio work is. It's the box. It's called Family Tree. So I have a mother, a daughter, a father, and there's 5 figures that are on each other's shoulders.
Okay.
And it goes up to about 40 feet tall.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh, I know exactly where that's at. Now I'm just like, it just clicked.
Yeah,
That's
my
so
universal.
wild. I had no idea that was you. So that's crazy. How often are you reaching out to like cities and companies now, or are they mostly reaching out to you? Like, could we get like super aggressive and make Orlando a little bit cooler with public art? Is what I'm asking.
Well, so in some ways, I've been lucky here. Like, I don't really try to pursue a lot of work. I think I get a lot of calls, if that makes sense.
Sure.
You know, I think I don't do as much RFPs. Request for proposals, just from the fact that, you know, if you ask one of my biggest regrets is there's a lot of works that never got built. The Jacksonville sculpture, which put me on the map in Florida for quite some time. They called it the LURP, the derp. I mean, there's already people already have tattoos of it. There's shirts, there's hats, there's all these things that people are making of my sculpture that hasn't even gotten built yet. And then the Terminal C, like I was supposed to have this giant sculpture with this paper airplane boy that I won a design competition for. And you spend tons of money in this design competition. I've probably won close to $30 million in design competitions that have never gotten built.
No way. Why? Where's the hang up there?
A couple things. One was COVID.
Oh, okay.
But then I think that was an excuse to figure out how to use it for something else. The other thing is politics. I mean, the reality is sometimes when I go and people ask me to be on the design team, sometimes I'm a design team because the component is to go after a waterfront with a park and a hotel and create an iconic piece of art. And actually my iconic piece of art helps them win the job. Is that I should always ask, okay, I will go after this, but what year term is the mayor in? Because if you're in your last year term, then the next year's mayor is not going to want to do this.
Yeah, the budget won't get through, and then
budget won't go through you, or that's not my piece of art. I didn't create this, I didn't start it. So yeah, a lot of times it's politics. I do have some pieces coming in downtown Orlando. They're smaller works, but finally through Commissioner Sheehan, she's been a great advocate of the arts. I'm going to create these little landmark sculptures to help identify the districts like Thornton Park.
Oh, it's so cool.
Mills and Colonial.
Yeah.
And so you'll see those things popping up in the next year or so.
Wayfinding. That's going to be perfect.
They're kind of, they're not giant pieces like you see everywhere else, but I'll have little sprinkles here and there in downtown. So, I think, I do, being a resident here for almost 20 something years, that I wish there's an opportunity to create something that becomes that other castle outside the gate. Lake Nona and Advent Health have been the biggest clients here to date. I think, as you know, everyone loves Lake Nona and the artwork that's there. And
Sculpture Garden is so cool. I mean, talk about it like an Instagrammable spot. Like even if you're not staying at the Wave, you're going to go out there to see your works and get Instagram. It's a really cool spot.
It's an amazing opportunity. That Sculpture Garden, I don't know if people know, but it's probably the most famous sculpture garden, at least in probably top 2 in Florida. It's got Henry Moore. People don't realize what's in that garden.
Right.
Mr. Lewis family brought his personal collection out there people don't know it's got the Wall Street Bull.
I know, yeah.
There's 7 copies of it. He owns all of them, and one of them is here in Orlando.
Right.
But when you're in New York, you're going to go see it. But you live here in Orlando, you don't even go there.
You don't even go there, yeah.
Yeah, but I hate saying this idea, but then you have 4 works of mine in the garden.
Right.
And I always hate saying this part, but it's like, I don't know if people realize I'm only the living artist. I'm the only living artist in that collection. I'm not sure if that's good to say or not.
No, that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing.
That's the reason, it's interesting because, you've been, people have been following me. People have seen me hanging out with a shark named Damon John.
Sure.
Which, he's really a big advocate of the artists and actually figuring out how artists who are living now can actually be able to monetize before they actually pass away.
Well, that's the thing. Like once an artist is gone, their works are appreciated more and they appreciate more, right? Yes. And so like, how do you do that while you're here? That makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And so how's that going? What's next with Damon?
Just trying to figure out, he's a shark, right? So,
yeah, of course. He wants to make some money.
He wants to make some money. I think he's a great sort of voice for these emerging artists that don't have a space or a team. He's like saying, if you're a singer or you're an actor, they all have teams around them. Why don't artists have teams around them? Yeah. And so he's helping artists such as like me to help figure out that space. And I appreciate him very much. I think we're both kind of diving into what that means. There's nothing comparable to it. It's not like I'm going into a traditional gallery or he's actually financing a sponge. Oh wait, sorry, he didn't get that deal. but he is. We're trying to figure things out together, and I think it's just the mutual passion we both have for art that I think is going to help not only me but other artists look at other models to help them be successful living artists.
Man, well, I feel like so with that and the wayfinding pieces and the iconic places with cities, like you're changing the game for what art actually is and placemaking. So I appreciate you, everything that you do for Orlando and your career, man. It's awesome. Thanks for hanging out.
No, thank you. Thank you for everything you do.
Oh, thank you.